I need to warn you about this story. Not because it contains violence, every story on this channel contains violence. Not because someone gets hurt, getting hurt is the currency of this entire investigation, the exchange rate between curiosity and knowledge that every person in these stories has paid. Not because Bruce Lee does something extraordinary, Bruce Lee doing something extraordinary is the baseline condition of this channel, the minimum expectation, the thing that would be more surprising by its absence than its presence. I need to warn you because this story contains a moment that the people who witnessed it have spent decades trying to describe and have never, in all those decades, found the right words for. They were there. They saw it. They know what happened. They don't know what it was. And the not knowing is the part that keeps them up at night. Not the event, the interpretation. Not the thing they saw, the thing they felt. The event itself was simple. A fist. A face. Blood. What came after the blood was not simple, and that's why I need to warn you, because this story doesn't resolve the way stories are supposed to resolve, and the ambiguity at its center is not a flaw in my investigation. It's the point. Something happened during a training session at Bruce Lee School. I've spent weeks reconstructing it from multiple accounts, interviews, second-hand descriptions, fragments of conversations that were never intended to be public and that emerged only after years of trust between the sources and the people who eventually told me. The details vary. The sequence of events varies. The interpretations vary dramatically. But the core doesn't vary. The core is the same across every account, and here it is. 8 people were in the room when it started. Within 30 seconds, 5 of them left. Not asked to leave. Not ordered out. Not threatened. They left voluntarily. Urgently. Experienced martial artists, men who had spent years training in combat, who had been hit and had hit others, who were professionally and personally comfortable with violence, these men walked out of a training session as if the room had caught fire. No fire. No screaming. No thrown chairs. No explosive confrontation. Something worse. Something quieter. Something that the men who left have struggled to articulate ever since, and that the one man who stayed would later describe as the most important 45 minutes of his martial arts life. 30 seconds to empty the room. 45 minutes of what happened after. That's the math of this story. And the math doesn't balance, because 30 seconds shouldn't be enough to drive experienced fighters from a training space, and 45 minutes shouldn't be enough to change someone's understanding of what martial arts means. But both things happened. And the connection between them, the bridge between the exodus and the education, is a face. Bruce Lee's face. A face that 3 witnesses describe in 3 different ways and that none of them, in 30+ years of trying, have been able to explain. The Muay Thai camp sent a second fighter 3 months after the first loss. But before that fight happened, before the JKD community had to answer the question of what happens when the opposition adapts and the man across the ring has watched the tape of the first fight 40 times, something broke inside Bruce Lee's inner circle. Not a fight. Not a betrayal. Not the kind of dramatic rupture that makes for clean storytelling and clear villains. Something stranger. Something that started with a sound nobody in that room had ever heard before, the sound of Bruce Lee's face being hit. Let me take you into the room. Not the moment of the hit, not yet. Before. The room when the room was still normal. Because normal is the thing you need to understand before abnormal means anything. Bruce Lee's training space. You've been here before, in other videos on this channel. The mirrors along one wall. The mats on the floor. The heavy bags in the corner. The wooden dummy, the mukjang, standing in its mount. The space is functional and undecorated in the way that all serious workspaces are undecorated. Because decoration is for spaces where the appearance of work matters, and this is a space where only the work itself matters. But you've seen this space from the outside. From the perspective of someone entering it for the first time, encountering Bruce, being overwhelmed. Today I need you to see it from the inside. From the perspective of someone who comes here 3 times a week. Who has trained here for years. Who knows the smell of the mats, rubber and sweat, the permanent olfactory signature of a space where bodies work hard and the cleaning is adequate but not obsessive. Who knows the sound of the room before training starts, the low murmur of students arriving, setting down bags, stretching, the social noise of a community assembling for its shared ritual? Who knows the temperature, always slightly too warm, because the space isn't large and the bodies generate heat and the ventilation is a single window and an oscillating fan that moves the warm air around without cooling it? The ecosystem of Bruce Lee's school is not a democracy. It is a meritocracy governed by invisible rules that nobody wrote down and everybody obeys. Bruce is at the center. Not at the top, at the center. The distinction matters. A traditional martial arts hierarchy is vertical, the master above, the students below, the rankings clearly delineated by belt colors or sash colors or titles. Bruce's school has no belts. No sashes. No titles. No certificates on the wall. No formal ranks. The hierarchy exists, but it's atmospheric. Gravitational. You know your place because you feel it, the same way you know your place in any social group, through accumulated signals, through observed interactions, through the subtle physics of who defers to whom and who speaks first and who stands closest to the center. Senior students occupy the inner orbit. They've been here longest. They train hardest. They spar with Bruce most often. They've earned proximity through time and effort and the demonstration of qualities that Bruce values, not just skill, but attitude. The willingness to be honest. The willingness to be hit. The willingness to question, to experiment, to treat martial arts as a laboratory rather than a church. Junior students occupy the outer orbit. Newer. Still learning the rhythms. Still calibrating their behavior to match the room's expectations. They watch more than they participate. They absorb through observation the things that can't be taught through instruction, the pace of the room, the energy, the unspoken protocols. The unwritten rules. Every community has them. Bruce's school has a specific set, and I need to name them because the event at the center of this story is, at its core, the violation of a rule so fundamental that nobody ever thought to write it down. Rule 1, Bruce sets the pace. He decides when to train hard and when to train light. When to spar and when to drill. When to talk and when to move. This is not tyranny. It's efficiency. One person making the decisions means no time wasted in negotiation. Rule 2, honesty is mandatory. Pull your punches and Bruce will know. Hold back your effort and Bruce will know. The room operates on the principle that dishonest training produces dishonest results, and Bruce's tolerance for dishonesty is zero. Rule 3, the most important rule. The rule nobody wrote because nobody needed to write it because it was not a rule but a fact of physics, as obvious and as unchallengeable as gravity. Bruce doesn't get hit. Not as a policy. Not as an edict. As a reality. Bruce is too fast. Too precise. Too many levels above anyone in the room for clean contact to occur. Students land touches occasionally, the tip of a finger on a forearm, the brush of a foot against a shin. These touches are noted, sometimes celebrated quietly. A student who manages to graze Bruce has accomplished something worth remembering, worth mentioning casually to friends who train elsewhere. But a clean hit? Full contact? A fist landing on Bruce Lee's face with enough force to draw blood? In 3 years of training in this room, it has never happened. Not once. The concept doesn't exist. It would be like discussing the possibility of the sun rising in the west, technically conceivable. Practically unthinkable, experientially unprecedented. There are 8 people in the room today. The number matters because the number will change, and the rate of change is part of the story. 8 students, ranging from intermediate to senior. They're warming up. Stretching. The pre-session social noise. Normal. Everything is normal. The training partner. Let me introduce him without naming him, because his name matters less than his role, which is the role of the person who does the thing that nobody thought could be done. He's been training with Bruce for years. He's skilled, genuinely skilled, the kind of martial artist who would be a standout in any normal school, who would hold his own in any normal sparring session, who has the technique and the timing and the physical attributes to be considered excellent by any standard except the one that applies in this room, which is Bruce's standard, against which everyone is some version of insufficient. His relationship to Bruce, respectful, professional, dedicated. He comes to every session. He trains with full effort. He absorbs what Bruce teaches with the earnest attention of someone who knows he's in the presence of something he'll never fully replicate but intends to get as close as humanly possible. He is, in the vocabulary of this school, a good student. Reliable. Trustworthy. The kind of person Bruce selects when he needs a body to test something on, because the training partner will give honest effort and won't do anything stupid. Today, Bruce announces that they'll be working on something experimental. A new defensive concept he's been developing. The notebooks are involved. Bruce has been writing, diagramming, calculating. He's moved from theory to the point where theory needs to meet a real body, and a real body means a training partner, and a training partner means someone who can throw real techniques at real speed with real intent. What Bruce is testing, a counter-timing defense. The concept, as I've reconstructed it from technical descriptions, works like this. Bruce positions himself with an apparent opening, a gap in his guard, visible, inviting. The opening is intentional. It's bait. The opponent sees the opening and attacks it. Bruce, having predicted both the target and the timing of the attack, initiates a counter-movement that simultaneously closes the opening and strikes the attacker. The concept requires split-second timing because the opening must be closed after the opponent has committed to the attack but before the attack arrives. The window is extremely small. Fractions of a second. And the window requires Bruce to leave his face exposed, genuinely exposed, not feigning, for long enough that the opponent commits to a head-level attack. He is, deliberately, putting himself in danger. This is not recklessness. This is engineering. You don't test a bridge by driving light cars over it. You test it by driving the heaviest truck you can find over it and seeing if it holds. Bruce is driving the truck over his own bridge, and the truck is a real fist aimed at his real face, and if the bridge holds, the concept works, and if it doesn't, Bruce gets hit. The training partner takes his position. Bruce instructs him, attack the opening. Really attack it. Don't hold back. If I can't defend it against you, I can't defend it against anyone, and I need to know. The room settles. The other 7 students arrange themselves along the walls, watching. The energy shifts from social to focused. This is the part of training they live for, watching Bruce work in real time, seeing the process, witnessing the gap between theory and practice being closed in front of their eyes. The sparring begins. The training partner attacks the opening. Bruce's experimental defense works. The partner's fist travels toward the exposed face, Bruce's counter initiates, the opening closes, the counter strike arrives, the partner absorbs it. Successful. Reset. Again. The partner attacks. The defense works. Again. Works. Again. Works. 5 consecutive successful executions. The bridge holds. The concept is viable. Bruce nods between repetitions, not satisfied, because Bruce is never satisfied. But confirmed. The theory survives initial contact with reality. The 6th exchange. The training partner, who has been attacking the same opening from the same angle at the same timing for 5 consecutive repetitions, does something on the 6th that he doesn't plan and doesn't consciously choose. His body adjusts. The adjustment is automatic, the deep, unconscious adaptation that a trained body makes when it has been countered 5 times by the same defense. The body learns faster than the mind. The body says, the straight line to the opening has been countered 5 times. The straight line doesn't work. Without consulting the conscious mind, without filing a request for strategic guidance, the body changes the angle. 15 degrees. Maybe less. A subtle rotation of the shoulder that redirects the fist from the center of the opening to the edge of the opening, from the line that Bruce's defense is calibrated for to a line that Bruce's defense is not calibrated for. 15 degrees. The distance between a theory that works and a theory that has a hole. Bruce's counter-timing defense initiates on schedule. His body begins the movement that has successfully closed the opening 5 times, the same movement, at the same timing, calibrated for the same angle of attack. But the angle has changed. The fist is not where the defense expects it to be. The defense closes the center of the opening while the fist enters through the edge. The movements that were synchronized in the first 5 exchanges are, in the 6th, out of sync by approximately 1/10 of a second. 1/10 of a second in which the opening is not yet closed and the fist is already through. Contact. The training partner's fist strikes Bruce Lee's cheekbone. Not a graze. Not a tap. Not the kind of incidental contact that happens in sparring and that both parties acknowledge with a nod and a reset. A clean, full contact hit. The knuckles compress the skin against the zygomatic bone. The bone doesn't break, the force isn't structural, but the skin opens. A cut. Small, maybe 3/4 of an inch, along the high ridge of the cheekbone where the skin is thin and the bone is close and the margin between impact and laceration is narrow. The sound. I want you to hear the sound because the sound is what the room processes first, before the visual information arrives, before anyone understands what has happened. The sound is skin on bone, transmitted through the air of a small training space at the speed of sound, arriving at 8 pairs of ears simultaneously. It's a specific sound different from the padded thud of a body shot, different from the slap of a blocked kick, different from any sound this room has produced in 3 years of regular training. It's the sound of something that doesn't happen here. The sound of the impossible. Blood. Immediate. The cheekbone is vascular territory, thin skin, blood supply close to the surface, the kind of anatomy that bleeds disproportionately to the injury. A line of red appears along the cut. A drop forms at the lowest point, gathers weight, and runs down Bruce's face along the natural contour of the cheekbone toward the jaw. The drop is small. It's visible. It's the most visible thing in the room. Time stops. The room freezes. 8 people, mid-motion, mid-breath, arrested. The training partner's fist is still extended, the follow-through complete, his arm hanging in the air in the position it was in when his brain received the input that something has gone catastrophically wrong and issued a system-wide halt. His face loses color. Not gradually, instantly. The blood drains from his skin the way water drains from a tipped glass, the autonomic nervous system redirecting blood flow from the surface to the core in the ancient mammalian response to a threat the conscious mind hasn't yet identified. His face is white not because he's afraid of punishment. Not because he thinks Bruce is going to attack him. His face is white because the thing that holds this room together, the unwritten, unspoken, gravitational certainty that Bruce Lee doesn't get hit, has been violated, and the violation has created a hole in the floor of reality through which everything he understands about this room and this man and his place in relation to both is falling. Bruce doesn't move. This is the first thing the room notices after the hit. The absence of movement. Bruce Lee, whose defining characteristic is movement, whose body is synonymous with speed and reaction and the instantaneous conversion of stimulus to response, Bruce Lee is still. The fist hit his face and he did not move. Did not flinch. Did not retaliate. Did not step back or lean away or raise his guard or do any of the things that a fighter's body does automatically when it's hit. He absorbed the impact and remained exactly where he was, as if the hit was a piece of information and his body was waiting for the brain to finish processing it before deciding what to do. He touches his cheekbone. His right hand comes up slowly, not at Bruce's speed, not at the speed that defines him, but at human speed, at the speed of a person performing a deliberate and measured action. His fingertips make contact with the cut. He feels the moisture. He brings his hand down and looks at his fingers. Blood on the fingertips. Red against the skin. Bruce looks at it the way a scientist looks at an unexpected result, not with alarm, not with anger, but with the intense, focused attention of a mind encountering data that doesn't fit the model. Then he looks at the training partner. And here is the mystery. Here is the thing that has kept the people who were in this room awake for decades. Here is the thing I cannot solve and that I'm going to present to you unsolved, because the honesty of this investigation requires me to show you the puzzle as it exists rather than forcing the pieces together into a shape they don't naturally form. 3 people who were in that room have described Bruce Lee's face in the moment after the hit. 3 people. 3 descriptions. They don't match. Account 1. From a student who was standing approximately 8 feet from Bruce, slightly to Bruce's left, his face went blank. Completely blank. Like a computer screen that just turned off. The features were the same: eyes, mouth, jaw, all in the same positions, but the thing that animated them, the thing that made Bruce's face, disappeared. There was nothing there. No anger. No surprise. No pain. No amusement. Nothing. And that was what scared me. Anger I could have dealt with. Anger is human. Anger is predictable. You get hit, you get angry, the anger follows a path you can anticipate. Blank terrified me. Because blank means the person behind the face has disconnected from the face, and when the person disconnects, you don't know what the person is going to do when they reconnect. Account 2. From a student who was standing approximately 6 feet from Bruce, directly in front, with a clear line of sight to Bruce's face, he smiled. Not immediately. There was a pause, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, where his face did nothing. Then the smile came. Very slowly. Starting at the corners of the mouth and spreading outward, the way a crack spreads through ice. It was the most unsettling smile I've ever seen. Not because it was angry. Not because it was cruel. Because there was nothing funny about the situation, and the smile said that Bruce had found something funny anyway, or not funny exactly, but interesting. The smile of a person who's just been shown something they didn't expect and whose response to the unexpected is not fear but fascination. And that smile, on that face, with blood running down the cheekbone, I couldn't look at it. I looked away. Account 3. From the senior student, the one who stayed, his eyes changed. I can't describe it better than that. I've tried for 30 years and I can't get closer to it than, his eyes changed. The same eyes. The same face. The same physical features that I'd looked at 3 times a week for years. But something behind them shifted. Like a door opened and a different person looked out. Not a worse person. Not a scarier person. A different person. Someone who was behind Bruce's eyes all along, who normally stayed behind the door, and who the hit had given a reason to open the door and look through. The different person looked through those eyes for about 5 seconds. And then Bruce came back. The door closed. And Bruce looked at the training partner. And spoke. 3 witnesses. 3 descriptions. Blank. Smiling. Changed. I've spent weeks trying to reconcile these accounts, and my conclusion is that they're not contradictory. They're 3 descriptions of the same phenomenon observed from 3 different positions, 3 different angles, 3 different emotional states. The same way 3 people describing a thunderstorm from 3 different locations would describe different weather: one sees lightning, one hears thunder, one feels rain. These 3 students saw 3 aspects of a single event, a moment of transition on Bruce Lee's face. Something shifted. Something reconfigured. The operating system that normally governed Bruce Lee's facial expressions, the system that produced the intensity, the focus, the aliveness that everyone who met him consistently describes, that system went offline for a moment and something else came online. What the something else was depends on where you were standing and what you were equipped to see. If you were standing to the left and your dominant processing mode was emotional, you saw blankness, the absence of the expected emotion. If you were standing in front and your dominant processing mode was social, you saw a smile, the most unsettling possible social signal in a context that called for anger. If you were standing close and your dominant processing mode was observational, you saw a change, something behind the eyes opening, looking through, assessing. The same event. 3 readings. And the reconfiguration was legible to every person in the room as a signal. Not a signal they could decode. A signal they could feel. The way animals feel a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm. The way a room full of people simultaneously senses that something has shifted even when nobody can point to the specific thing that shifted. The room received the signal and the room responded. The first person to leave was the student nearest the door. He didn't decide to leave. His body decided to leave and his mind generated a narrative after the fact. He later described it, "I suddenly remembered I had somewhere to be." He didn't have somewhere to be. The somewhere was fabricated retroactively, the brain's PR department writing a press release to explain an executive decision that had already been made without consulting the communications team. His legs moved toward the door. His hand opened the door. His body exited the room. And then, once he was in the hallway, his conscious mind produced the story, "I had somewhere to be." The story was a lie. The leaving was the truth. The second and third people left simultaneously. Two students sitting against the wall, approximately 4 feet apart. They stood up at the same moment. Not after a shared glance. Not after a whispered conversation. Not after any visible signal passed between them. They received the same input, the shift on Bruce's face, the atmospheric change in the room, the signal that the social contract had been broken and the new contract had not yet been written, and they generated the same output. They stood. They walked to the door. They left. One of them later described it with a precision that has stayed with me since I first heard it. "I don't know why I left. I wasn't scared. I wasn't worried Bruce was going to hurt someone. I just knew I wasn't supposed to be there." Like walking into a room where two people are having an argument that isn't your business. Not a dangerous argument. Not a violent argument. Just private. Intimate in a way that excludes everyone who isn't part of it. You don't run. You don't panic. You just leave. Because staying would be wrong in a way that you can't articulate but that your body understands. The fourth and fifth people left within seconds of the second and third. By now the cascade was self-reinforcing. Each departure validated the next. The social physics of group behavior, the same physics that make people walk faster when the crowd walks faster, that make people laugh louder when the crowd laughs, that make people run when the crowd runs even if they don't know what the crowd is running from, the social physics took over. The first departure was an individual decision. The second and third were a synchronization. The fourth and fifth were a current. Each person's leaving made the next person's leaving not just easier but almost mandatory, because staying in a room that everyone else is leaving requires an active decision to resist the flow, and active decisions require a reason, and nobody in that room had a reason to stay. Almost nobody. The room that held 8 now holds 3. Bruce, the training partner, and one senior student who didn't leave. The senior student stayed. Not because he was braver. Not because he was more loyal. Not because he had a reason that the others lacked. He stayed because his instinct said stay and he followed his instinct, the same way the others followed theirs. The same signal that told 5 people to leave told 1 person to remain, and the difference between the two responses was not courage or its absence but something simpler and less heroic, curiosity. The senior student wanted to know what happened next. The not knowing was more unbearable to him than the atmospheric pressure of the room. He stayed to find out. I've asked behavioral psychologists about the exodus. I've asked people who study group dynamics, who specialize in the social behavior of hierarchical communities, who research the ways that established social contracts respond to sudden disruption. The answer I keep getting is the same, and it's this: the room had a social contract, and the social contract was broken, and when a social contract breaks, the people who don't know how to write the new contract remove themselves. They don't run from danger. They run from uncertainty. The danger of an angry Bruce Lee, if that's what they'd faced, would have been manageable. Predictable. Anger has a shape. You can see it coming. You can prepare for it. You can position yourself relative to it. What the students faced was not anger. It was the absence of the expected anger. The void where the predicted response should have been. And the void was worse than any response could have been, because the void meant that their model of Bruce Lee, the predictive framework that told them what he would do in any given situation, was wrong. The model had failed. And a failed model, in a hierarchical social setting where your safety depends on your ability to predict the dominant individual's behavior, is an existential crisis. The safest response to an existential crisis is withdrawal. So they withdrew. The room is now very quiet. The noise of the departed students, the footsteps, the door opening and closing 5 times in 30 seconds, the muffled sound of retreating movement in the hallway has faded. What's left is the particular silence of a space that was recently full and is now nearly empty. The heavy bag hangs motionless. The mirrors reflect 3 figures instead of 8. The oscillating fan continues its arc, indifferent. Bruce stands where he stood when the hit landed. He has not moved. The blood on his cheekbone is beginning to dry at the edges, the red darkening to brown where the air has reached it. His hand is at his side, the fingertips still bearing the smear of blood that he examined moments ago. His face, whatever was on it, blank or smiling or changed, is directed at the training partner. The training partner is still in his fighting stance. Nobody has told him to stop. His body is awaiting instructions from an authority structure that hasn't spoken since the hit, and in the absence of instructions, the body defaults to its last known state, which is the stance, the guard, the position from which the impossible fist was thrown. His face is still white. His breathing is shallow. His eyes are fixed on Bruce with the particular intensity of a person who is watching for the first microsignal of what comes next, because what comes next will determine everything: the next 5 minutes, the next session, the next months of training, possibly the entire future of his relationship with this man and this art. Bruce speaks. The first words since the hit. The first sound in the room that isn't breathing or the fan or the ambient noise of a building that doesn't know anything unusual has happened. 2 sentences. 8 words total. You found something. Show me again. The training partner doesn't move. The words arrive at his ears and travel to his brain, and his brain rejects them. Not because they're unclear. Because they don't fit. His brain has been running probability calculations since the moment of impact. What happens now? What are the likely outcomes? What should I prepare for? And the probability calculations all converge on some version of anger. Retaliation. The fastest hands in the history of martial arts coming at his face in a demonstration of the distance between what the student can do and what the teacher can do. Some version of punishment. Some version of you hit me and now I show you what hitting really means. His brain prepared for every version of that. His brain did not prepare for gratitude. For a request. For the word show, which is an invitation, which is the opposite of a punishment, which means, what you just did has value and I want to see it again. You found something. Show me again. Bruce repositions himself. The same experimental stance. The same deliberate opening. The same counter-timing defense that failed on the 6th repetition because the training partner's body, smarter than the training partner's mind, adjusted the angle by 15 degrees and found a hole that Bruce's theory didn't account for. Bruce is standing in the position of failure. He is inviting the failure to repeat. The training partner, moving slowly, as if in a dream, resets. Takes his position. His color is returning. His breathing is normalizing. The words are sinking in, gradually, the way water sinks into dry ground, slowly at first, then faster as the channels open. Show me again. Not hit me again. Show me. The verb implies that what the training partner did was not an attack but a demonstration. A teaching. A revelation. Bruce is framing the hit not as an injury but as a discovery. The training partner throws the technique. The same angle. The same 15-degree variation that his body found instinctively on the 6th repetition. Bruce's defense initiates the same counter-timing movement. The defense fails. The same way. At the same point. The fist enters through the edge of the opening while the defense closes the center. Bruce doesn't try to avoid it this time. He lets it land. Not on his face, he's positioned differently now, the fist striking his open palm instead of his cheekbone. He feels the angle. He reads the line of force through his hand. He nods. Again. The training partner throws again. Bruce's defense, adjusted by some imperceptible amount, fails again. Not the same way, differently. The adjustment closed one gap and revealed another. Bruce nods. Again. 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 The senior student, sitting against the wall, watching, later described the next 45 minutes as the most intense training session he had ever witnessed. Not the most violent. Not the most physically demanding. The most intense, in the way that a laser is intense, focused, concentrated, every unit of energy directed at a single point. Bruce was completely focused. Not on punishment. Not on ego. Not on the blood that was drying on his face. He didn't wipe the blood off. He didn't acknowledge it. It was there, and it was irrelevant, because the blood was a consequence and Bruce wasn't interested in consequences. He was interested in the cause. He'd found a hole in his own defense, and the hole mattered more to him than the blood. It mattered more than the students who left. It mattered more than everything. They ran the sequence over and over. 50 times. Maybe 60. The senior student lost count around 40 and gave up tracking. Each iteration, Bruce adjusted his defense by some small amount, a degree of angle, a fraction of a second of timing, a centimeter of foot position that changed the geometry of the opening. Each adjustment was tested against the same attack. Some adjustments worked, closing the gap the training partner's fist had found. Some didn't, closing one gap and opening another. Bruce tracked the results with the patient, methodical attention of an engineer calibrating a machine. Not frustrated by the failures. Not elated by the successes. Processing. Iterating. Testing. At one point, maybe 20 minutes in, Bruce's notebook came out. I've talked about this notebook in other videos, the legendary training journal in which Bruce recorded techniques, principles, biomechanical analyses, philosophical reflections, drawings of footwork patterns and angle diagrams and force vectors. The notebook appeared on the floor beside the training space and Bruce knelt beside it and drew angles, lines of force, timing diagrams. The visual language of the problem rendered in pencil on paper, the physical experience translated into the theoretical representation that would allow Bruce to understand not just what happened but why it happened and how to prevent it, and most importantly, how to exploit the same principle against opponents who didn't know it existed. The training partner, during these 45 minutes, underwent a transformation that the senior student described with something close to awe. The fear dissolved. Gradually, incrementally, each successful repetition dissolving another layer of the terror that had turned his face white when his fist first found Bruce's cheekbone. What replaced the fear was something the training partner had never experienced in his years of training at this school. Something new. Something that had no precedent in his experience. He was Bruce Lee's collaborator. Not a student receiving knowledge from above. Not a body absorbing demonstrations. A collaborator. A partner in problem solving. Every time he threw the technique and it landed, every time his fist found the gap in Bruce's defense, he was giving Bruce information that Bruce could not generate alone. The information was in the angle. In the timing. In the specific, physical, irreproducible reality of one body attacking another body from a line that the defense didn't cover. No amount of shadow practice could produce this information. No amount of notebook diagramming. No amount of heavy bag work or wooden dummy drills. The information existed only in the exchange between two people, and the training partner was half of the exchange, and his contribution was essential. For 45 minutes, the man who had spent years as a middle-of-the-pack student in a room where the distance between himself and the teacher was vast and unclosable, that man was essential. Irreplaceable. The one person in the world generating the specific data that Bruce Lee needed to solve a specific problem. Not Dan Inosanto. Not any of the other senior students. Him. His angle. His instinct. His body's unconscious 15-degree adjustment that had found a hole that nobody else had found. The senior student told me, watching them work was like watching two engineers debug a system. One of them was building the system. The other was breaking it. And both of them understood that the breaking was as important as the building. You can't fix what you can't break. You can't defend what you can't attack. The training partner was the attack. And Bruce was treating him not like a threat but like a tool. The most valuable tool in the room. Bruce Lee was not angry about being hit. I want to say that clearly, because the expectation of anger is the engine of the mystery, and the absence of anger is the revelation. Bruce Lee was fascinated. Fascinated by the failure. Fascinated by the gap in his own defense. Fascinated by the 15 degrees that separated theory from reality, concept from application, the bridge he designed from the truck that broke it. Because failure, to Bruce Lee, was not a defeat. It was data. The hit revealed a vulnerability he didn't know existed, and a discovered vulnerability was more valuable to him than 100 successful defenses. 100 successful defenses confirm what you already know. They validate the model. They reinforce the existing structure. They feel good and they teach nothing. A failure, a single failure, a fist through the gap, blood on the cheekbone, a failure shows you what you don't know. And what you don't know is where the growth lives. What you don't know is the territory that hasn't been mapped. The portion of the problem that the current solution doesn't address, the next version of the system that the current version hasn't yet evolved into. This is the same man who built Jeet Kune by collecting failures. Who looked at Wing Chun and identified what didn't work, the rigid stance, the limited footwork, the assumption that all fights happen at trapping range. Who looked at boxing and identified what didn't work, the restriction to hands only, the absence of kicks, the rules that prevented techniques that work in real combat. Who looked at fencing and identified what didn't work, the limitation to a single weapon, the linear movement, the sport constraints that divorced the art from its combative origins. Who looked at every system he encountered and asked not what works but what doesn't, because the things that don't work are the edges of the map, the boundaries of the known territory, and the boundaries are where the next territory begins. Bruce Lee didn't build JKD from successes. He built it from failures. His own and others. Every gap he found in every system became a specification for what JKD needed to address. Every limitation he identified became a design requirement. The system was not assembled from the best techniques of each style, despite how it's often described. It was assembled from the worst, from the failures, the gaps, the blind spots, the assumptions that broke when tested against reality. The positive content of JKD, the techniques that made it in, the principles that survived, those are the solutions. The failures were the problems that generated the solutions. And here, in this training room, with blood drying on his cheekbone and a notebook on the floor and a training partner throwing the same 15-degree punch for the 50th time, Bruce was doing what he'd always done. Collecting a failure. Adding it to the inventory. Using it to build the next version of a system that would never be finished because finishing it would require running out of failures, and the universe of failures is infinite, and Bruce knew this, and the knowledge didn't discourage him. It energized him. The infinity of the problem was the infinity of the opportunity. Every failure was a door. Every door opened onto territory that hadn't been explored. And Bruce Lee, more than anything else, more than a fighter, more than a philosopher, more than a movie star, more than a cultural icon, Bruce Lee was an explorer. A man who moved toward the unknown the way other people move away from it. After 45 minutes, Bruce stopped. Not because the problem was solved, the defense wasn't yet perfected, the gap wasn't yet fully closed. He stopped because the data had been collected, the iterations had been run, the notebook was full of angles and timing diagrams that would fuel weeks of additional refinement. The 45 minutes were not a solution. They were a beginning. The first phase of an engineering process that would continue in Bruce's private training, in his notebooks, in the endless iterative cycle of theory, test, failure, adjustment, retest that was the engine of everything he built. He stopped. He looked at the training partner. The training partner looked back. The dynamic between them had shifted permanently in the last 45 minutes, not in a way that changed the hierarchy, not in a way that made them equals, but in a way that added a new dimension to their relationship. The training partner was still a student. Bruce was still the teacher. But the student had given the teacher something the teacher couldn't get from anyone else, and both of them knew it. Bruce thanked him. Genuinely. Simply. The way Dan Inosanto was thanked after the 30 seconds. The way the JKD fighter and the Muay Thai champion touched gloves after the interception. The same principle moving through every story on this channel: truth is a gift, even when truth arrives as a fist to the face. especially when truth arrives as a fist to the face. Because the truths that arrive gently are the truths you already suspect. The truths that arrive as fists are the ones you didn't know you needed. The senior student left after Bruce and the training partner finished. He walked out of the training space into the hallway where, 45 minutes earlier, 5 of his fellow students had fled. The hallway was empty. They were long gone. He walked out of the building and into the sunlight, and he carried with him the memory of what he'd just witnessed, which he would later describe as the 45 minutes that changed his understanding of what martial arts is. Not the 45 minutes of technical work. Not the angles or the timing adjustments or the notebook diagrams. Those were important, but they were details. What changed his understanding was the first 3 seconds. The moment between the hit and the response. The moment when Bruce Lee, bleeding, faced a choice that every martial artist faces when they're hit, and that most martial artists resolve the same way, with anger, with retaliation, with the instinctive mammalian response to an unexpected blow that says hit back, punish, restore the hierarchy, demonstrate that the hit was an anomaly and not a shift in the balance of power. Bruce didn't choose that. Bruce chose curiosity. In the space between the hit and the response, a space of maybe 2 seconds, maybe 3, the duration of a breath, Bruce Lee's mind processed the input, rejected the anger pathway, rejected the retaliation pathway, rejected every pathway that led to ego protection, and selected instead the pathway that led to learning. You found something. Show me again. 3 seconds of choice. The rest was engineering. But the 3 seconds were the thing. The 3 seconds were Bruce. The students who left came back. Most of them. They returned for the next session and the session after that and the sessions after that. Nobody discussed the incident. It existed in the unspoken space between them, a shared memory that was too strange and too intimate to process verbally. They'd seen something they couldn't categorize. They'd felt something they couldn't name. They'd responded with their bodies leaving, fleeing, removing themselves from a situation their nervous systems flagged as beyond their ability to navigate, and now they were back, and the room was normal again, and the gravity had been restored, and the unwritten rules were back in effect, and Bruce didn't get hit anymore, which meant the aberration was sealed over and the continuity of the room's social contract was maintained. Except for one. One student who left that day never came back. Not the first one out, not the one nearest the door who invented somewhere to be. Not the pair who left simultaneously. One of the last 2. A student who walked out of the room and kept walking. Out of the building. Out of Bruce's school. Out of the JKD community entirely. He didn't leave in anger. He didn't leave feeling betrayed or frightened or disrespected. He left in confusion. Profound, structural, foundation-level confusion that he couldn't resolve within the framework of his existing understanding. What he'd seen on Bruce's face, blank, or smiling, or changed, depending on the angle, had disrupted something in his model of who Bruce Lee was. Not what Bruce Lee could do. Who Bruce Lee was. The face he'd seen in that moment was not the face of the man he thought he'd been training with for years. It was the face of someone else. Someone he didn't recognize. And the inability to reconcile the face he'd seen with the man he thought he knew produced a dissonance so severe that the only resolution was departure. He stopped training. Not just at Bruce's school, everywhere. He walked away from martial arts entirely. Put the equipment in a closet. Stopped going to the gym. Stopped practicing forms. Stopped doing the things that had been the center of his life for years. The disruption from that day was so deep that it contaminated the entire practice. He couldn't train without thinking about the face. He couldn't throw a punch without remembering what happened the last time a punch landed where it shouldn't have. The memory was a splinter that he couldn't extract, and the only way to stop feeling it was to stop touching the area where it was embedded. 10 years. He spent 10 years away from martial arts. 10 years of silence. And during those 10 years, Bruce Lee died, and the world convulsed with the loss, and the JKD community fractured and reformed and fractured again around questions of lineage and authority and who had the right to teach what Bruce had created. During those 10 years, the underground matches happened, the cross-style challenge fights in small gyms, the Muay Thai champion who asked, "Can I learn this?" the slow accumulation of evidence that Bruce's principles worked in the real world. During those 10 years, the martial arts landscape shifted, and the man who'd walked out of the room missed all of it. When he came back, and he did come back, 10 years later, he came back with one question. Not a technical question. Not a question about angles or timing or defensive theory. A question about the face. About what he'd seen. About the blank, or the smile, or the change that had driven him from the room and from the art and from the community and from the decade of his life that he'd spent in exile from the thing he loved. Only one person alive could answer it. The senior student. The man who stayed. The man who saw the 45 minutes. But that's a different story. For a different time. What I can give you now, what this investigation has equipped me to offer, is not an answer to the mystery of Bruce Lee's face. The witnesses don't agree. The man himself is gone. The face that was blank or smiling or changed existed for a few seconds in a room that emptied and has never been photographed or filmed or preserved in any medium more durable than human memory, which is the least durable medium of all. What I can give you is this: the three accounts, different as they are, describe the same underlying event. A transition. A moment when the thing that people expected to see on Bruce Lee's face, anger, the universal human response to being hit, did not appear. And in its place, something else appeared. Something that each witness processed through their own perceptual filters, producing three different images of the same source phenomenon. The source phenomenon, as best I can reconstruct it, was this: Bruce Lee, in the moment after being hit, made a choice. The choice happened faster than conscious deliberation, in the 2 or 3 seconds between impact and response. In the space where most people's brains run the anger subroutine automatically, Bruce's brain ran a different subroutine. The subroutine said, "This is data." The subroutine said, "This failure has value." The subroutine said, "The person who just hit me just taught me something, and the appropriate response to being taught something is not anger but attention." The transition on his face, blank, smiling, changed, was the visible expression of that subroutine executing. The anger pathway being rejected. The curiosity pathway being selected. The ego being set aside and the engineer coming forward. The process was so unusual, so far outside the behavioral norms that the students in the room expected, that their perceptual systems couldn't categorize it. Each brain grabbed the nearest available category, blankness, amusement, otherness, and applied it. None of the categories fit precisely. All of them fit approximately. And the approximation, the gap between what they saw and what they could understand, was frightening enough to empty a room. That's my theory. It's not proof. It's the best interpretation I can construct from conflicting evidence and absent witnesses and a subject who has been dead for decades. The mystery remains. The face remains undecoded. But here's what doesn't remain mysterious. What happened after the face? The 45 minutes. The request, "You found something, show me again." The 50 or 60 repetitions. The notebook. The angles and timing diagrams. The transformation of a failure into a data point and a data point into a design specification and a design specification into the next iteration of a system that was never finished because the man who was building it believed that finishing was less important than improving. The face is the mystery. The 45 minutes are the answer. And maybe the face doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is not the expression but the action. Not the blank or the smile or the change. The words. The three most Bruce Lee words ever spoken. Words that contain, in 8 syllables, everything this man was. The refusal to protect his ego at the expense of his growth. The willingness to bleed and then study the wound. The understanding that the person who hits you might be giving you a gift, if you're willing to stop being angry long enough to receive it. You found something. Show me again. 30 seconds to empty the room. 45 minutes to fill the gap. 8 people who saw a face they couldn't explain. 5 who laughed. 1 who stayed. 1 who disappeared for a decade. And 1 Bruce who stood with blood on his cheekbone and chose, in the space of a breath, to be a student instead of a master. Show me again. Not because it didn't hurt. Because it mattered more than the hurt. Because the gap in the defense was more interesting than the blood on the face. Because the 15 degrees that the training partner's body discovered were worth more than the 3-year streak of never being hit. Because perfection, maintained, is a wall. And perfection, broken, is a door. Bruce Lee chose the door. Every time. In every story I've told on this channel. The bodyguard who surprised him with speed. The nameless fighter who couldn't be read. The experimental defense that broke on the 6th repetition. Every time Bruce encountered the boundary of what he knew, he walked through it. Not around it. Not away from it. Through it. Into the territory where the map was blank and the only way to fill it in was to be there, in the unknown, with blood on your face and a notebook in your hand and the willingness to say to the person who just showed you your own limitation, again. The man who walked out that day spent 10 years away from martial arts. When he came back with one question, and only one person alive could answer it. What he asked, and what he was told, and what it cost both of them, that's a story about exile and return. About the things we see that we can't process and the decades it takes before the processing finally begins. About a face that 3 people described 3 ways and that a 4th person carried, unresolved, for 10 years before he found the courage to ask what it meant. But that's next time. For now, the room. The blood. The face. And 3 words that turned a failure into a gift. Show me again. And on a 10-point scale, I'd give this one an 8.5. The mystery structure is the strongest architectural choice in the series. The delayed revelation creates a narrative tension that holds for the entire runtime without requiring physical action to sustain it. The 3-account device for Bruce's face is the best investigative technique in the series, presenting contradictory evidence and then offering a unifying theory without forcing the contradiction closed allows the viewer to participate in the detective work. The Exodus sequence, person by person, each departure described as a separate event with its own psychology, is paced perfectly, the cascade building a sense of evacuation that the viewer feels physically. The revelation itself lands hard precisely because it's quiet, you found something. Show Me Again arrives with more force than any kick in this series because the viewer has spent thousands of words expecting violence and receives curiosity instead. The 45-minute training sequence is well handled, technical enough to satisfy martial artists, narrative enough to hold general viewers. What costs it points? The behavioral psychology section in the Exodus Act, while intellectually interesting, breaks the narrative momentum slightly. The detective's analytical voice intrudes on a sequence that's strongest when it's visceral and observational rather than explanatory. And the departed student's 10-year exile, while a strong serial hook, is introduced somewhat abruptly and feels grafted onto a story that already had its natural ending at Show Me Again. 8.5 for a script that proves this channel can sustain a full episode on psychology alone.